But I am someone who focuses on questions. That was one of the things I liked to do as a teacher, is I liked to ask my students questions, to their frustration sometimes, although some of them really thought it was a great technique for them. I would look at how a student was starting a problem that they were struggling with so that I could figure out how the gears were turning in their mind. We don't have the opportunity to do a lot of discussion during this session, but I do want you to be thinking. And the first question I want you to think about is, why do we do visitations? And I want you to think about that while I talk a little bit. Why do you think? How would you explain to somebody why we do visitations? Right? Well, part of an answer might be in order to listen and discern, and to help a fraternity, therefore, or thereby, to go forth. We do visitations in order to see what is there. And if you want the analogy of a bishop, the word episkopos, bishop, for the Greeks, means overseer. So when you read the word bishop in your New Testament, that's the word overseer in Greek. Someone who is able to see the breadth of the church. And yes, the minister, in some fashion, indeed, anytime we're in leadership, but certainly the minister of a fraternity has to oversee the fraternity, maybe a little more intimately than we normally think of a bishop with his parishes. But really, it is nice if the bishop is able to be intimately close with his parishes, too. But for us, certainly, when we're talking about our brothers and sisters in fraternity, to be able to see what's going on, we have to listen to them, right? And so there have been several visitations I've been on where I make a point of making sure that either I personally, as the pastoral visitor, or together with the fraternal visitor or visitors, that everybody has a chance to speak to us in settings big or small. I mean, sometimes I already know there's something so delicate that I need to solicit from everybody an individual personal conversation in confidence. And I use the analogy of confession. I say that whatever comments I put into the visitation report will be anonymized so that no one will know that you are the one who said them to me. And sometimes I have to do a lot of work because somebody has such a unique perspective, right? So I can't quote them, but I can still share their thoughts, right? In order to listen, and sometimes it's hard for Sally to listen to Bill, so someone else has to hear what Sally has to say and put it into different words and to tell Bill about it without even letting him know that it comes from Sally, right? Some of the visitations we make are the ordinary official visitations every 3 years, but sometimes we need an extra visitation officially, right? There's a fraternity in trouble. And some of you have experienced this at the regional level where people come in from the national fraternity to help you. But, sometimes you see a fraternity that's struggling and they're not willing to invite you. Well, avail yourself of the act on the responsibility you have. It's not just a right, it's a responsibility to go and perform a visitation. Sometimes there are so many of those visitations you would want to do that you don't have time to make it to one particular place that you should go, where they don't want you, but you should go there anyway, right? But over time, we need to make time for that. There are the official visitations, but then there are also the unofficial visits that we can do, And some of you have told me over the years how you wanted to just go somewhere, and they were trembling in their boots because they confused that with an official visitation, right? And so some of what we do is, because we want to be able to listen to our brothers and sisters, we have to cultivate a sense of trust. We have to be persistent in the things we do to cultivate that trust, to elicit the confidence to allow them to speak, to encourage them, to place courage in their hearts, right? Not just through the things we say, but I think also through the attitude that we bring, and above all, the prayer that we invest in that visitation or unofficial visit. To encourage them enough that they can follow through on the things that they know what to do, and to encourage them enough that we allow the gospel to shape our hearts and theirs. Because I think I've been shaped by the visitations I've performed as much as anything else. Sometimes I feel like the fraternal visitors help me to grow as a Christian and as a priest when we perform a visitation together. Some animals only do things by instinct, some of the lesser creatures. But it's interesting as you go higher up the chain of development, there are some primates that we know can only parent well if they have been parented by one of their own, right? And one of you used the analogy with me earlier this week about a grandmother teaching her children to parent, and this is a lot of the leadership that we exercise at the higher levels, where we can't do things for people, but we have to help them to do the things they're supposed to do, right? And so in the same way, if you have children who have had children, then you understand, as much as you care for your grandchildren, you can't be their parent. And sometimes your children need a little bit of, encouragement or advice or direction, whatever it might be. And our leadership sometimes is like that, where we're helping. When I think about my own parents, my dad would keep us all he would set up 5 huts around his house if he could. At least I know he would have done that when I was in college. He was incredibly stressed by the idea of his eldest. The first son moving away was very hard on him. My mom was proud. She was like, the eagles are leaving the nest, which it's usually the other way around for a lot of families, but in any event, my mom is a little different. So, and I think that we want to help the eagles to leave the nest. So sometimes we ask people to do things that they're not willing to do, or that they don't understand how loving it is, because they want that comfort and that consolation, and so they can only give people comfort and consolation, and they can't make the difficult decisions that they have to make in their role as leaders, right? And they see something that's challenging as necessarily hurtful when it's not intended to be that way. And so that's part of our challenge of bringing our lives to the gospel, and allowing the gospel, and not our hallmark ideas about Christianity, but the gospel itself to come to our lives. Our brothers and sisters will only learn from us how to lead by seeing good examples, receiving advice, and practicing, right? So in some sense, the follow-up to the visitation maybe is especially important because we have to see them put things into practice, right? And the follow-up to the visitations that you experience on the other end of it too, that at the, one of the things is in the church, and we see this in the order, even though we sometimes resist it, everybody is subject to somebody else. Even the Pope is subject to the council of all the bishops together. When he makes pronouncements, he can only articulate an understanding of the gospel that is already there in the church through the Holy Spirit speaking through the body of the church and especially in the College of Bishops. He can't, the teaching about the infallibility of the Pope is that he can only make an infallible pronouncement under certain conditions, and one of those is it has to be something that the church is already proclaiming, right? He can't just wake up one morning and let's say the Pope gets dementia and he says something like Jesus is a Martian, right? He can't make that an official declaration of the church. He can't pronounce that infallibly. He can't just do whatever he might want to do or whatever he might feel. He has to proclaim the gospel as the church understands it and has already been expressing it, right? And that's maybe a really important thing for those of us who are in leadership to understand. We cannot change the gospel, however much, because we have to help our brothers and sisters, we might want to allow them to do things however they are, because they're our friends, or they seem so nice in so many situations. We have to help them to face the gospel and to embrace the gospel. And when they don't, we still are responsible to the gospel. So why is there a visitation? Well, this is part of the ongoing process that the church entrusts to us in leadership so that we also can practice what it is to lead in a Christian and Franciscan style, in a gospel-oriented way. And also to help others to experience what it is to be heard, right? I just got an email last night from somebody who's saying, I'm not being heard, right? But to help them to experience what it is to be heard so that they also know how to listen. And that's in so many different directions, not just in terms of leadership, but even just in terms of accompanying each other. We practice the visitation so that people can experience our own discernment. Like a friend of mine in college, he said, it was so wonderful when this one professor would forget what he was going to say because he would have to recreate the mathematics, like live in the classroom. And so you could see the gears turning in his head. And so for us, the same way, so that other people can experience our discernment, seeing it, experiencing it live, right? The prayer that goes into it, the caution that goes into it, the courage that goes into it. We experience it, they experience it. Our own discernment in difficulty, so that they learn better how to discern, just as we're practicing and learning better how to discern. And finally, then, so how we go forth. And by our going forth, the visitation can encourage those we visit to go forth in turn. This is a wonderful way of looking at the visitation that I think, this theme that Jan brought out in her State of the Order. It's a wonderful way of thinking about visitations. Because the first and most important thing, I've heard stories about visitations where someone just comes and lectures. I would prefer as a teacher not to lecture at you. I would be asking questions. If we had an hour, just to talk about this, I would probably take an hour and a quarter or so from your time if I were given an hour. And I would ask you questions and I would elicit a discussion, right? You're going to have to do that on your own because I only have 15 minutes and I've already overstayed my welcome, right? And so whoever's next among the friars is going to make his way on up here. And while he's making his way on up here, I just want to leave you with this thought about visitations as an opportunity to listen to our brothers and sisters and to practice the different ways in which we encourage them and build trust so that they can speak clearly, well, and they learn the charity and the discernment that they need. In the way that we listen to them, they can learn some discernment so that they can see how to go forth, not just to go forth, but to go forth bringing their life to the gospel and speaking the gospel with their life.